Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and every year a new iPhone comes out, and they kind of get harder and harder to review. These phones are getting so good that it almost seems like there's really not that much to complain about, which is why I try to also incorporate some experience of how using this phone might actually be different in your day-to-day life, which is what we're going to be doing today by giving a short little day in the life video where we're going to take this iPhone, we're going to go to New York City, shoot some pictures, shoot a lot of video with it, and see just how well this camera is. And also, because I bought the iPhone 14 Pro Max, I want to see just how well this thing survives in an extreme battery test, because I bought this big phone for a big battery. I'm hoping it will last me through the entire day. Okay, it's time to wake up, and yes, one of the first new experiences waking up with the iPhone 14 Pro is that new always-on display. So as soon as I wake up, I can see the full display for important events, weather, and time, and then start my day. I usually start that by going over and making an espresso while I prepare everything. I usually put on a podcast to listen to, and it's one of the areas where I can actually use the new dynamic island feature the most, so I can quickly reveal podcast controls to skim through boring sections. I grind some coffee beans, pull a pretty bad espresso shot with little crema, but hey, it gets the job done. I'm not gonna spend a bunch of time redoing the shot, and usually the first app I look at the start of the day is Twitter and Safari as I scroll through and read some news stories, and also check to see if there's any breaking tech news I needed to read up on. And yeah, sitting outside or even next to a really bright window, you can see that the display is completely legible because this screen gets super bright, up to 2000 nits of peak brightness. We're gonna test that more later in the video as we actually go out in direct sunlight. Now, before I get to doing some work, I actually have to walk my dog, and hey, it's also a good time to test the new action mode on the iPhone 14 Pro. All right, just finishing up some work here, dealing with some emails, doing some channel analytics stuff, basically all the boring behind the scenes YouTube stuff that doesn't involve shooting video or talking about technology, the really boring parts of my job that I don't want to do, but I have to do, otherwise I won't succeed at this. So yeah, I wish I didn't have to do this stuff, but hey, there it is. Now, I'm eager to start testing the iPhone 14 Pro Max camera, so it's time to actually get to the train station and head into the city. Taking the train, Jersey style, Hoboken style, as some would say. That's the tragedy of living in New Jersey. You gotta take a train to get into the city. It's vast miles of nothingness sometimes, but I enjoy it. I enjoy the vast emptiness, like the vast emptiness in my soul. Almost everyone on the train is absolutely glued to their own phone. I take a few test shots using the 48 megapixel sensor. It's crazy how much detail you can see on some of these phone photos when you crop in, and I love the highlights in this particular photo. I also got to appreciate the always-on display during this trip. I usually keep my phone out of my pocket during train rides, but even keeping it on my lap, I had a constant view of the time. And after a few stops, we're in downtown New York City at the World Trade Center station in the Oculus, which is a pretty impressive structure in its own right. The architecture here is just stunning. If it's your first time here, you'll be amazed as soon as you step into the main platform area with just an expansive hall of shops. And hey, there's even an Apple store right in the Oculus, but we already have everything that Apple has to sell, so why would we shop there? All right, time to finally start shooting some photos. As we exit the Oculus, we see a live band playing with a decent crowd drawn, so I take a few candid snaps, and I really love this little section right under the Oculus where they have this vibrant artwork. It's a good place to test the 14 Pro's camera to see how it deals with not only human subjects, but also a nice way to see how it handles all these bright, vivid colors. So far, I think the camera is doing great. I feel like the colors are just a bit more punchy than the iPhone 13 Pro, and it's also a good test of the new 48 megapixel sensor on the 14 Pro's camera system. I actually utilized the full 48 megapixel sensor for a lot of these photos. In this example, you can see just how much detail the phone retains. Even when cropping this much into the shot, you can still see details in the fabric of this man's clothing. I just love using the iPhone so much for photography like this, even though I have multiple dedicated cameras at my disposal that could theoretically take a better picture. And even though the iPhone 14 Pro Max is bigger for a phone, it is still small when it comes to comparing it against a camera, and just the general ubiquitousness of the iPhone in general makes it less daunting to point that camera at someone. Everyone knows what an iPhone is. There's no fear behind a big lens being pointed at you, and it's such a normal part of life that it relieves my anxiety when taking street photography. Because of my extreme anxiety levels though, when I usually shoot photos, I'm usually not shooting human subjects, I'm usually shooting things like architecture or buildings, and to no surprise, the iPhone 14 Pro takes some crisp photos with that 48 megapixel sensor. Okay, this isn't a mistake. If you watched my video a year ago, I can't believe it's a year ago, when I was testing the iPhone 13 mini and the iPhone 13 Pro, I came to this spot and did a 1080p cinematic mode test shot. And the reason why I'm here again, I'm not a boring person, you know, I do go to different spots. The reason I'm here again is to try and see, like, this now has 4K cinematic mode on the iPhone 14, and you can also shoot it now in 24 frames per second, which is usually what I shoot my videos at. So I kind of wanted to do like a side-by-side, review the old 1080p footage, throw that up there, and then also put in the 4K footage, and then we can kind of see, like, how much of an improvement is this versus that older shot. Maybe I should have just brought my iPhone 13 along to do that and do a direct side-by-side comparison. But you know what? This is more interesting. It's a throwback to my old video when we did this the last time. So that's going to be interesting. I'm sure I look a little bit different. It's been a year, but maybe I look better. Maybe I look better. I think I look better. After that, I took a quick break on this little rooftop hangout, just a small walk away from the World Trade Center. It's actually pretty secluded for how close it is, and secluded, quiet spots in downtown Manhattan are a rarity. So I spent some time checking the weather for the rest of the day, checked my notifications, followed up on a few messages, and posted one of the photos we just took to Twitter. In bright sunlight, again, I wanted to test this earlier, I was very happy. The iPhone 14 Pro Max's display did not quit. The 2000 nits of max brightness literally shined, and I could see all of my content clearly, and I didn't notice any excessive screen dimming during this day in the life. I also took some time to plan out the route to Japan Village in Brooklyn and used Apple Maps to get transit directions for the subway. After finding the train station, I used Apple Pay on my iPhone 14 Pro and used the tap to pay feature on the subway. I love how easy that is now, and after a few minutes of waiting, I boarded the train to Japan Village. Through this whole trip, navigation on the iPhone 14 Pro worked really well with the new dynamic island. The details of the route were always available on the top section, and long pressing on it revealed more details for directions. Just got off the train, heading over to the Japan Village, but it's a great time to also kind of reflect on the iPhone 14 Pro's front-facing camera. It got like a big improvement this year, and I'm like been blown away by some of the selfies I've been taking with this. Like, they're a little too good. Like, I can see all the imperfection in my skin, and also just the video quality itself from the front-facing camera. Using this as kind of like from like a vlogging perspective, like you kind of want to see like what's in the frame and stuff like that. And before, when I used to do iPhone footage, I always do that thing where you flip the other main camera around because it had such better quality than the front-facing camera. But I don't feel that way anymore. Like, I'm using the front-facing camera. I think it looks really good. And then even like the improvements with like autofocus, like, yeah, the front-facing camera now has autofocus where before it didn't. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, if you really think about it, the front camera on the older iPhones was fixed focus. It didn't have autofocus, so you couldn't zoom in like this and get a shot. But not that you'd want that, but you can now. But yeah, heading over to Japan Village. We're really hungry at this point. We've been shooting all day with like the 14 Pro, getting like tons of photos. And we're gonna just basically go down, get something to eat. It's all good. So we finally made it to our destination and decided to sit down for a nice Japanese style meal at Waku Waku, which is a cool Japanese style izakaya which serves drinks with smaller plate dishes and snacks. There's a lot of yummy food here, but I'm a simple guy. I really like the fried chicken karage, and the panko fried kushi-ade cheese just tasted so good. Look at this, got a handheld mic. That's the pro move. I'm like a newscaster out here. I got the newscaster hair, so it's all good. But listen, we've been testing the iPhone 14 Pro Max's camera system. Wanted to take a chance to kind of talk about it a little bit outside. And yeah, I'm really enjoying this new camera system on the 14 Pro Max. The wide angle lens, getting that extra 48 megapixels with the RAW now, when you enable it, seems to produce a lot more detail, especially when you're digitally cropping into shots. And the new 2x mode on the camera has been kind of like a nice middle ground between the 1x and the 3x. It sounds so cliche of me to say that, but it's kind of true. Like the 3x sometimes cropped in a little bit too much, and then optically, the image quality on the 3x, it just wasn't like the best. Like that 1x camera, Apple puts so much like stock into that camera. They put so much budget into increasing the sensor size of that camera every year, increasing the image quality of that camera every year, that when you start to switch to the other camera systems, like even the ultra wide, you do notice the loss in quality moving over from the main camera to all these other cameras. Even though they're great and they have a lot of utility and they're super useful at times, you do notice the quality loss. So making the 2x camera on this system take advantage of the main camera optics, but also preserving a lot of the quality by cropping into that 48 megapixel sensor kind of gives it better image quality than the 3x. So, you know, unless the subject's like really far away and you really need to zoom in, I think you're usually better off going with the 2x. Or if you're just trying to capture a different perspective, it's very helpful. Video quality on this too has been amazing. Testing it out with the main camera, doing 4K, 24 frames per second, maybe some 60 frames a second for B-roll. Just been pretty happy with the results I've been seeing as we've been shooting with this all day long. Also, I gotta say, one of the main reasons that I went for the iPhone 14 Pro Max this year wasn't necessarily the size. Like having a big display is fine and all that, but I kind of view it more as a detriment. I like smaller phones. Like if they made a Pro Mini, I might be tempted to get that, but it doesn't look like they're ever gonna release a mini phone again. But the Pro Max is kind of massive, but I've been doing okay fitting it in my pocket. Now, the main thing I bought this phone for was battery life. Now, listen, we've been testing this thing pretty hardcore. I mean, it's been lots of camera shooting, lots of 4K video recording. The screen brightness has been like at 100% in direct sunlight. And by the way, the screen like stays super bright. It doesn't aggressively dim as much as my 13 Pro as well. So I've been really liking that. But the battery life on this, again, testing it really crazy. And it's been off the charger since about like 7 a.m. And it's about 5 o'clock right now. And we're at about 27% battery life. Again, that doesn't sound like the greatest battery life. Like if you're like a casual user and you're going, you only have 27% battery life by 5 o'clock, you're probably going, okay, this is a poorly performing phone when it comes to battery. But again, I've been stress testing this like crazy. So the fact that this is at still 27% to me after all the photos and video I've been taking today, yeah, I think this is doing pretty well. I think it's probably smart that I went with the 14 Pro Max over the 14 Pro, because I'm trying to think if I was doing the same kind of shoot today with my 14 Pro, and it was, you know, if we're at 27% battery life with the Max, I'm kind of thinking if we were on like the Pro, I think we'd be below 10% at this point. And I would be upset because I didn't bring any MagSafe battery pack. I didn't bring any sort of external charger with me. My camera person just informed me that I should do a squatting shot to make it look more interesting and perhaps a little bit awkward. You know, today isn't leg day. I'm getting a cramp right now as I'm saying this, but I will say the purple color on the 14 Pro is also, I like it a lot. I know a lot of people have been complaining that it's not purple enough, but look at this thing. This thing is the perfect purple color. I like that it's a deeper purple color and not maybe some of the more brighter purple colors that we've seen Apple released on previous phones like the iPhone 11. There's a ton of shops and stores in this section of Brooklyn too. Too many to mention, but I did go to one of my favorites on this trip, which is Book Off. Went through a store called Book Off, which has like a bunch of like anime memorabilia, and then like for me like a bunch of like retro old like video games, and they're all like Japanese import stuff, but it's all really cool. Like I love looking through that store. It's always like a fun time. But you know, this has been, again, I'll reiterate, a stress test day for this iPhone 14 Pro Max. But I gotta say, one of the main reasons I got this phone was because I wanted a battery that would be impossible to destroy. And looking at it as we're sitting here right now, taking a nice little break, at 7 o'clock, and I will say this came off the charger at around 7 a.m. this morning, but it is a little disappointing. You know, it's like Magic 7s because the battery life on this right now is actually at 7%. So maybe it was a little bit unrealistic of me to expect this thing to stand up to anything I threw at it. Again, I will reiterate, lots of photo taking today, recording so many segments with 4K video, 60 frames per second, 24 frames per second, cinematic mode. I mean, again, I have just been abusing this thing all day long. Wouldn't expect any phone to be able to outlast maybe what we've been putting it through. But again, the main reason I got the bigger 14 Pro Max was because I really wanted a bigger battery. I knew I'd be using this camera a lot more with all of its new features. And to actually sit here at 7 o'clock when I still need this to run for probably another 2 hours before I'm starting to think about bed, it's kind of a little bit disappointing for me because I just thought, you know, okay, I'm used to the iPhone 13 Pro. If I go for the Max version on the 14 Pro Max, I'll never experience any battery anxiety ever again. And it's just not the case, right? Like, and maybe that was unrealistic of me to expect that, but it is what it is. And I just can't help but say, personally, I do feel a little bit disappointed. Now, I didn't want to leave the city without truly draining the battery of the iPhone 14 Pro Max. That was my goal going into this trip. And I said, hey, it's gonna be a battery stress test. So that's what I did. I stayed around the Oculus train station and I spent the rest of the time taking some night photos. But shortly after that, the iPhone 14 Pro Max's battery is officially dead. And it's time to head back home, slightly defeated. And that was my day in the life. You can see it's still light out. You probably thought I filmed this the same day of. I didn't. That's a little trick of the trade. Still wearing the same shirt though, because gotta make it look authentic. But I did want to record my thoughts afterwards to let you know that ultimately, I really did enjoy using the 14 Pro Max. I gotta say, the camera system on this feels really good. In a way, I feel like this is probably one of the first phones that I've used with this camera system where it feels like I'm not running into any limitations with the camera hardware too much, but just my own limitations of how skilled I am using that camera. And I think the 14 Pro Max is just that little extra push that the iPhone camera needed with things like 4K cinematic mode, with that new 48 megapixel sensor where you can just get so much detail out of some of these photos that it really does feel like the ultimate pocket camera at this point. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that little glimpse in the day of the life. And if you did, please give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, including a future full iPhone 14 Pro Max review, make sure you're subscribed. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.